Thank you. Well, Amnesty International has been working with human rights activists, independent journalists to get as much testimony from people on the ground as possible. Now, that is challenging, as you say, because of the near total internet blackout. But nonetheless, we have been able to get eyewitness testimony. We've been able to get information from 21 cities. We've looked at video footage and verified that footage. And what it tells us is a story where the Iranian security forces have been using excessive lethal force to crush what have been largely peaceful protests.
In terms of security forces using live rounds, opening fire at crowds of protesters?
Yes, so the patterns that we have seen include security forces using firearms, water cannons, tear gas to disperse protests, and beating demonstrators with batons. Now, images of bullet casings left on the ground, as well as the shockingly high death toll, indicate that live ammunition has been used. And we've looked at the situation in 21 cities, and according to then the credible reports we have, at least 106 protesters we believe have been killed, but actually the real death toll may be much higher.
On top of that, the authorities themselves have confirmed that at least 1,000 people have been arrested. Have we any idea of what will happen to those people?
We do, because we've been tracking the aftermath of demonstrations in Iran for many years. And the concern is that those who are arrested will be certainly interrogated, but in some cases they are likely to be subjected to forms of torture or other treatment. That has been a pattern over the last few years. They are likely to be held in what we call incommunicado detention, meaning that they are likely not to have access to lawyers or their families, certainly for days, in some cases perhaps even weeks. So that's a major concern. Among those who've been arrested are at least one human rights activist who we know, and our concerns are clearly about her, because of then the way in which the Iranian authorities have been cracking down on human rights defenders more generally over recent years.
What about this unprecedented internet shutdown then? The group NetBlock says that the country is almost completely shut off from the world. What effect does that have on people inside Iran?
So the internet shutdown, as we understand it, happened as of the 16th of November, so less than a day after the protests began. And what the Iranian authorities did was to shut off nearly all means of online communications for people inside Iran. And it's clearly an information blackout that is an attempt by the authorities to prevent people from sharing images, videos of the deadly force being used by security forces. You mentioned the NGO NetBlocks. Its information is that Iran's connectivity to the outside world has fallen to 4% of ordinary levels since the protests began. That's an extraordinary fall. All mobile networks have been disconnected. And there is some information that gets out, and that's how we've been able to get information. And it's really only because some users have still been able to access the internet through the use of what are called virtual private networks, VPNs, and other means. But as I say, it's a tiny percentage of what Iran's access to the internet is usually.
And just finally, Iran's supreme leader has said that this is a security issue and not the people. They've also described, the authorities have also described the protesters as rioters. This would suggest that they're not really interested in changing their tactics, that the priority for them is stopping these demonstrations.
The supreme leader, the president of Iran, and the head of the judiciary have all demonized the protesters and warned that security forces will continue to confront them with force. So the supreme leader demonized the protesters as villains, claiming that they'd been incited to violence by counter-revolutionaries and foreign enemies of Iran, and is really, by ordering the security forces to implement their duties to end the protests, effectively giving a green light for this brutality to continue. And really, then it's up to, particularly then, the mechanisms of the United Nations and the international community more broadly to really be having a loud voice that denounce what is a bloody crackdown, and give access to independent human rights observers to hospitals and detention centres in the country.